depending upon which network you're watching, you thought this was either big news, a really damning bombshell. If you're listening to Ken Starr after the initial opening statement and the 45 minutes on each side, majority, minority, you were coming away with this awkward sense of Sondland had somehow really changed the narrative here, and he had delivered a bombshell. Well, Sondland, let me explain something here. I mean, everybody knows Sondland is a hotelier, not a really politically astute person, certainly not in the world of geopolitical debate. If you've noticed a distinct difference between the testimonies of Ambassador Yovanovitch and Ambassador Volker and others that are associated with the Department of State and the NSC, i.e. Morrison and Kent, and then, of course, Ambassador Taylor as well. If you notice a distinct difference between how they answer questions and how they will seek to define their answers in a very clear, concise, legally responsible way. Now, why do they do that? Well, because this is an impeachment inquiry. And then when you are an impeachment inquiry participant, you are sworn under oath. You are testifying as to potential material facts that will be put into it's a court, it's a trial, it's actual federal rules of evidence. So whatever you are saying now, if it is different than what you gave in an original deposition in the Soviet bunker to Adam Schiff, and then if you add something to it or subtract something from that, you now put yourself into a very scary arena. Now, most responsible, politically aware, diplomatically aware people will avoid this at all costs. They will avoid it. They will avoid it at all costs. This is not something that they want to make themselves acceptable to. So what happened was there was a strong inclination on Sondland's part to try to blame everyone but himself and try to ride the fence between both sides. And that never, ever works in front of any tribunal at all, be it a regular courtroom or be it a court of public opinion in a political process like this impeachment hearing. It doesn't work as a witness. It is uncomfortable. You end up getting hit from both sides. And now, in particular, Ambassador Sondland has now exposed himself, I'm told, and we had warned him about this, I think, in the pundit arena at large. We had attempted to warn the Sondlands of the world that they, by changing their original testimony, that they had better have a shitload of facts to back it up. And supposition has no place in your testimony. Presumption certainly has no place in this environment. I could not think, and I've been around the block once or twice or 1,000 times, but I cannot think of a more inconvenient time as a sworn-in witness before Congress, a party to an impeachment inquiry, going after the most powerful person on the face of the earth. I cannot think of a more inconvenient time to introduce something like presumption. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, he was introducing supposition, which is a different legal term, a quasi-legal term for he was making his judgments based upon career and military conflations, lexicons, nomenclature, things of that nature. So that's a little bit different. Not wise, particularly wise to do, but not quite putting yourself on such tenuous, untenable legal grounds. What happened today, Ambassador Sondland went in there, a neophyte, with a terrible lawyer who must not understand what he was putting his client in front of. There was quite literally presumption after presumption. There wasn't even the discernment that could be tied to professional supposition, meaning the introduction of facts as he may have understood them based upon his experience. Now, being a hotel chain owner, donating $1.1 million to the inaugural and getting the EU ambassador job, which is essentially a very politically palatable job to extend to those who are, here's where I search for the politically correct term, generous with their contributions to the White House. This is normal standard practice. It's just the mistake that occurred here is attempting to have Sondland participate in any of these communications with the Ukraine. Is it part of his quote unquote portfolio as ambassador to the EU? Yes, it is, but in a very oblique way. And honestly, attempting to have conversations that include career bureaucrats like Bill Taylor, the ambassador who was put in temporarily after Yovanovitch was pulled, having Sondland speaking with one of the most respected career diplomats in that area of the world, in Volker, he seemed to be seriously out of place. He did not quite understand anything that was going on. He admitted that his limited conversations with Giuliani, were bent on him having this interpretation that there was a quid pro quo. So there has been no evidence introduced. There is just more presumption on Sondland's part that lends itself convenient to the Democrats because they're functioning under supposition and presumptions, things that are just very much based on circumstantial evidence. Now, we have all kinds of timelines involved here. We did verify. I thought the most effective questioning in the afternoon was done by our Congressman Turner. Congressman Turner, who is a pretty esteemed attorney in his own right, basically picked apart and destroyed Sondland's new introduction of his presumption of quid pro quo. So Sondland himself, as the hearing went on, I recognized a pattern in his behavior. And if you are a fan or a aficionado of real crime documentaries, or if you are someone who has seen the Netflix series about interrogation methods and about people who just respond certain ways under questioning, what I saw, and this is by no means like one of those little body language analyses or anything, but what I saw was a consistent attempt to get out of the room. Now, when a detective or a police officer is interrogating a person who has committed a crime or has material witness knowledge about a crime, when they are subjected to interrogation, they exhibit certain signals that they would prefer the process to end. And there are others who are very hesitant to bring lawyers into it. Now, they are told Mr. Sondland is before good cop, bad cop situation in a non-criminal court situation, but nonetheless, he is under oath. So what happens is these people tend to respond in very pathological ways. They don't want to shut the questioning down by saying, I would like my lawyer, because they want to appear as if they are willing to help. They want to help. They want to help. They want to help get the answers that the police need. So this is always a mistake that they make. If you watch this stuff, it really is a pathological mistake that they make. So they have this information, or they're a party to a crime, and they don't want to say, I want an attorney, no more questions, because they're not smart enough. It's always the dumbest ones who think, you know what, I can work my way around this. I can answer questions in non-definitive ways. I can outsmart the interrogator. And always turns out the same way. The interrogation goes about in a soft opening. And then it gets a little harder, and then the subject gets a little more uncomfortable and starts to squirm a little bit. So ask questions like, maybe we should pull back on this. Maybe I should speak to an attorney. I think I'm giving you the wrong impression, and I didn't mean to say that. But I'm not changing my story. But now that you mentioned that what another witness said, now my recollection is refreshed, and now I have a different take on what you read back to me. So this is what happens when you have multiple witnesses test, or and they're getting interrogated on one case. They know that another person is down the hall, and they see the detectives come and go in and out of the room, much like you see the congressman go in and out of the room, and they know that there's multiple witnesses accounts going on, and they can't keep everything straight in their head. And this is exactly what happened with Sondland today. So Sondland, and very much like you will see these criminal or material witnesses do in these documentaries on real crime and interrogations, they say, I really got to go. I've got to get home. My kids are at home. I've got to get my wife at the airport. I've got the very important business meeting that I can't miss. I've got a deadline, and blah, blah, blah. They always have something like that. Sondland introduces this very early on, that he needs to leave because he needs to catch a flight. This is an oldie but goodie. So right there is one of your first tells. This guy doesn't really understand what's going on. By the end, he was clearly confused. He knew that his opening statement was taken as a victory by the Democrats. He saw that the Republicans were attaching a lot of gravitas to what he was saying, and he realized that he went out too far. So he's got this back and forth hokey pokey mentality of, I'm going to try to walk this back a little bit without getting myself caught in trouble, but I really got to catch my flight. Oh, I didn't hear that from anyone. I presumed to be working under that. Well, who told you that? Nobody told me that. Okay, so how did you presume that was? Well, I just presumed that that's what the president wanted. That's not good in any case at all, whether you're testifying as a material witness to a crime, or if you are potentially a person who was engaged in criminal activity. Either way, in no process, be it in a courtroom or be it in front of Congress, do you want to add ambiguity to your testimony, particularly when it's already been either by attrition or addition changed fundamentally from your original deposition. So we're already in very choppy waters here for Ambassador Sondland, who admittedly is not a political person. He is not a diplomatically aware person. He is simply the beneficiary of a position that is largely ceremonial as ambassador to the EU. He just got caught up in what was a pseudo-official mission to get assurances that Ukraine, being one of the top 3 most corrupt countries in the world, was not going to just be more of the same after they received yet another $400 million from the United States of America. And oh, by the way, Ambassador Sondland, ambassador to the EU, was aware, very aware, that, and most of his conversations with Trump were consistent with getting the European countries to give more aid in these situations, or to the Middle East situations, taking their ISIS prisoners back into Europe. I mean, so Sondland is not close to the president. He was not a political ally to the president. He was a Johnny-come-lately at the end of the campaign, willing to write a big check to try to get one of these ceremonial ambassadorships, of which he was in receipt of this particular one. However, this makes him the weakest part of the whole exoskeletal system as far as ambassadors and Department of State personnel giving testimony to Congress. It's very dangerous. He had every right made available to him by the administration to join others who intelligently decide to let the court make a determination if executive privilege can or cannot be exerted with his testimony. He chose, I will follow the lead of Ambassador Volker, Yovanovitch, and Taylor, because I've got ambassador in my title as well. So I don't have any reason not to go. I've got to go. Well, big mistake. Those people have career-long decorated resumes, and they are uniquely aware of what not to say when they're in front of Congress. Sondland is clueless. He proceeds to throw out assumptions, presumptions, and then proceeds to walk them back. So he's throwing them out and agreeing with these really these stretches, I would call them, that the Democrats are trying to get him to do. And then, of course, he has to rebuke his own words when Republicans are questioning him. I don't think that our initial morning session with him turned out very well, because I don't think that the council caster really had an idea that Sondland was going to go off into the weeds like this. And as Jim Jordan said, leave out the most important conversation, direct knowledge conversation he had on any matter related to the Ukraine, was a conversation on September 8th with the President of the United States, in which the President tells him exclusively, I want nothing. Basically, stop asking me this. I want nothing from Ukraine. What could Ukraine do for me? Basically, I want Zelensky to prove he's not a scumbag. Now, that's my Adam Schiff parody of the phone call, but that's essentially what he said. No quid pro quos. Now, the Democrats are saying the White House was already aware of the whistleblower complaint at this time. And that argument is going to hold weight, because the president is throwing in the term quid pro quo nonsensically into the conversation with Sondland, almost as if he's speaking, knowing that this is going to be a material fact in an upcoming investigation with Congress. So again, Trump, a little more politically aware, yes, than Sondland, but definitely not well versed in diplomacy and terminologies, phraseologies, ways to protect yourself from that type of conclusionary event taking effect. So, long story short, Sondland's testimony was not adding any material facts to the case. Sondland's testimony, while sounding different, and that's because he's not a real ambassador, he's not a real figure with State Department experience. He's a hotel chain guy. You could tell by his actions that he was very annoyed, and certainly everybody saw the tweet, or at least I hope you did, of the footage where he is shocked that this process, this is how ill-prepared he is to testify today. His own attorney had failed to advise him of the whole process. 45 minutes for the majority, 45 minutes for the minority. And then there'll be some follow-up questions, perhaps in 15-minute segments, and then a break. And then we will go to the questioning by the members. Now, when at 1 o'clock or whereabouts, when he is told that they're taking a recess so that he may have lunch, he turns to his attorney and says, what are they talking about? Why would we resume? This is bullshit. So this shows the limited knowledge, the limited scope of knowledge that he had going before Congress under oath to speak about the actions of the President of the United States in an inquiry regarding potential removal of the most powerful person on the face of the earth. So Sondland is childlike. He's childlike in his naivete, his ignorance of where he's at. And he seeks to, imbue some humor in awkward places. This only further demonstrates his lack of awareness that he has essentially stepped out of the line and called Ambassador Volker a liar. He has essentially called our next witness, Hale, a liar. He is calling Rudy Giuliani a liar. He's calling Secretary Perry a liar, and by extension, calling Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo liars. This is really the extent to which a private citizen or a de facto public servant, beneficiary of a political ambassadorship patronage, really, to the extent they can get themselves in trouble Ambassador Sondland today got himself in the highest threshold, the highest atmosphere that you can get yourself in trouble outside of a criminal court. He did get himself into the hottest possible water today that he could have. They now, I've been told, others have been told, it's really not a secret at this point, that Vice President Pence's office, Secretary of State Pompeo, soon to be former Secretary of Energy Perry, they have all contacted their respective attorneys. They are issuing their version of what they remember as far as interactions, who was there, if Sondland was there. In the context of Sondland's testimony today, there are no less than 3 of some of the highest ranking officials in this country who will be submitting a potential criminal referral to the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice will be in receipt of sworn statements by these high-ranking officials that this testimony given under oath by Sondland is incorrect, and that will kickstart what the worst nightmare Sondland could ever possibly endure, which is now a Department of Justice investigation into his testimony. It is likely that Devin Nunes, in partnership with the members of the Intelligence Committee on his side and on the minority side, will also refer some of Sondland's statements to the Department of Justice for further scrutiny. That will cause a double back. Someone in the Department of Justice will then do an immediate, or the FBI will do an immediate review of the testimony given by Volker, by Taylor, and given by anyone who was intercepted into the realm of Sunderland's comments, and they will use that as a backdrop to see who was telling the truth. So there's going to be a secondary impact here from Sunderland's testimony, all focused on potential criminal charges to be filed against Sondland. It's almost as if he made the gravest mistake you can make before Congress. You have now impugned the character of the president, and you have done so based on not any direct awareness, but on the presumption that that's what he wanted, which is it's not only highly irregular, it's so anti-intellectual and ignorant that I can't verbalize or articulate the potential personal devastation that he brought upon himself today. And much like these criminal interrogation docu-series that I've been referencing, he just wants to get out of the room. He thinks that by getting out of the room, this will be over for him. Well, here is the bad news, Ambassador Sondland. It is far, far, far from over. I believe in my heart of hearts that this was the Hail Mary perceptive reality, political perception reality that Adam Schiff needed to further this process to judiciary for actual impeachment articles. Now, also brought back Mick Mulvaney's comments in the disastrous press conference where he just goes off the cuff with the craziest shit you could possibly say. That stuff is, and by the way, can I introduce one little fact here? I believe multiple incidents of ineptitude demonstrated by the Democrat, the majority on the Intelligence Committee, their IT department must be run by, if you ever wondered how all these Pakistanis got the Awan brothers were running the IT departments for the Democrats, watch them try to play a video clip of Mick Mulvaney or anybody else. It has been like 0 for 3 for them. They absolutely cannot get this thing to work. It is quite amusing. Toward the end of this thing, much like a subject to an interrogation, Sondland sees light at the end of the tunnel, and when he sees light at the end of the tunnel, he wishes to diffuse any tension remaining with humor. And that is further a sign of discomfort and a desire to flee this area. So the longer they keep you talking and then they start to talk about how it's almost over, that's generally when the police will really get the information that they want. So it wasn't until the end that Sondland realized, oh shit, I don't even recall what I just said over the last 4 hours, but what I'm getting now from the Republicans is like, well, I'm in trouble now. I may have said some things I didn't quite mean because I have no basis to say them. And the Democrats just pounced, and they pounced on this because all they have is this supposition, the circumstantial evidence that it must have been that the Ukrainians knew. So, in spite of the fact that we have testimony from Volker, we have testimony from Taylor, we have testimony from Morrison, we have testimony from we have open public statements made by Pompeo and Pence. There was no awareness by the Ukrainians that the aid was being held up. Sondland, a sole voice in the wilderness, decides to say, yeah, they did know, but then proceeds to give us no information to back that up. To say that is problematic, it's quite a bit of an understatement. Does he realize that he is seated before an impeachment inquiry? I just don't know. He does not appear to me to be a very bright person. He makes what would appear to a common sense individual watching. He appears to make additional statements to his original deposition. He appears to make assertions that must have been based on facts, that it was in fact a quid pro quo. And then after the statement is over, it all starts to systematically fall apart. And for Ambassador Sondland, that is a real problem because he has now entered himself center stage. If this does go, which I know my odds yesterday were 50-50, it was such a bad day for the Schiff circus that I thought they couldn't overcome it unless Sondland somehow, screwed himself and came up with something that could change the dynamic. Well, he said something that changed the dynamic, but proved nothing. That's good enough to give a little bit of a respirator to the impeachment inquiry that Schiff is doing. So Sondland provided what Schiff needed to carry this thing over and give it a kick over to judiciary. He successfully tied this together with Mick Mulvaney's get over it comments regarding politics and foreign aid. So it's still a bare minimum political blowback opportunity here for the Democrats to take it to the Judiciary Committee at all, but they will do so. That's already been defined by their resolution. Now, I believe they've opened the window, a crack on what was sealed shut. And but Sondland did not do it in any way that contributed material facts to the conversation. It was simply a dumber version of what Lieutenant Colonel Vindman did in his testimony. And Lieutenant Colonel Vindman almost surreally says that President Trump demanded from Zelensky these certain things, an investigation into Biden, Burisma, and the 2016 election in order to get the funding aid. Well, there was no demand. And then he proceeded to walk it back to the point, well, in my experience as a military officer, a senior officer says they need a favor, that is an order. Well, there's two things wrong with that comment. That's not true. And then number two, Zelensky is a president of a sovereign nation. He is not rendered subjugate to anything by any other president of a sovereign nation. So he is not a subordinate to President Trump. That may be his interpretation, but now you've got Vindman giving an interpretation of an interpretation, which of course is worthless. Once this goes to the federal rules of evidence arena, which theoretically could be applied when the Judiciary Committee convenes and tries to take evidence into account for the articles being drafted. that's when it'll start to fall apart, because hearsay is not going to work. I am now not at 50-50 anymore that they will go to a censure motion. I am now at like 60-40, maybe 65-35, that this is now going impeachment articles, which could very well be a beneficial thing for Republicans in Congress. Now, I am at 65-35 that I believe the innuendo that was inserted by Ambassador Sondland today, the innuendo that was reintroduced from Mulvaney, will be coupled with the obstruction of Congress charges, because there'll be no dispute resolution within the courts in time for the Democrats to get this thing done in the time period that they want to get it done. That means probably no Bolton, definitely no Mulvaney, no Pompeo. So they're going to accuse the White House of obstruction of Congress. So what we've got here is a little bit a dying flame that Sondland decided to drop a little bit of lighter fluid on. Unfortunately for Sondland, he dropped lighter fluid onto charcoals, and that will be just enough of a slow burn that will occupy the media for a short period of time. Doesn't change any of our contentions made on committee or by the White House. Doesn't change any evidentiary introduction that would change a senator's mind. I have two things to do here before I hop off. The two things to watch for now are watch for the responses to the media and tweets from leadership in the Senate. Not so much what Ron Johnson or Lindsey Graham is going to say, or Ted Cruz or Rand Paul. I think you're better off watching what McConnell, Thune, Rounds, those guys start to say about what they learned today. I think that's where you're going to take this image of the Senate getting into their jury mode. There'll be a time where, McConnell has not gone there yet. McConnell has simply said, if you introduce articles of impeachment, they pass by the House, they come over to the Senate, I have to conduct the trial. That's constitutional. That you can't dismiss it out of hand. It must be dealt with. So if you watch the Senate and they start to stand up a little straighter, their tone gets a little bit more solemn, and they seem to be a little bit more hands off on the whole commentary process, that's your first indicator that they are expecting impeachment articles to come over to them. So they're going to start to dampen and tamp down on the political rhetoric. Generally a smart thing to do. I would be very surprised if you heard any Republican senator agree with Ken Starr's comments this morning, which were a little bit inflammatory and nonsensical, that there might be a Nixon moment where the senators walk over to the White House and inform the president that he is potentially, losing the support of the party. That is in no way evident from anything that I've saw from the committee or other members in the Republican House. I've seen nothing to indicate any wavering by anyone. So I'm watching the Senate to see if they think now this might be more of an indicator that articles of impeachment are in fact coming. I am moving off my 50-50 needle whether or not they will do impeachment over censure. So I am now at 65-35. There's another testimony from Hale that is occurring soon, if not now. I encourage you to watch it, because now we're going to get to a little bit more about Sondland's conversation, supposedly, and a little bit more of how we draw separation between facts, fiction, and assumptions, presumptions, to actually knowing what's going on. I would not want to be in Ambassador Sondland's shoes right now. Again, just to wrap this up, that is the number one thing that a good interrogator wants to do with somebody he knows has not given him the full story, or maybe a party to a crime or a witness to a crime. They play on this need to leave. They play on this, I just want to get out of here. And there's this sense of relief when they're allowed to just leave, and they think that this process is over. And that's where Sondland, in his own pea brain, is thinking, if I could just get out of this seat, if I could just get away from these congressmen, if I could just get my hand off the Bible and get on a plane, this is all going to disappear. I'll resign. I don't want anything to do with anything anymore. And, whatever. That's not the way it works. He has now put himself squarely squarely into this impeachment process, and he has put himself squarely into the investigative sites of the Department of Justice will be conducted by the FBI, because you just don't make random comments about a Supreme Court justice when you're talking about Kavanaugh and what they did to him. You certainly do not make random comments based on presumptions in defiance of the words of 6 or 7 other highly esteemed individuals involved. You don't just make those comments on national TV under oath to Congress related to the most powerful man on the planet being Donald Trump. That's not how you get away. You don't get away by getting up and getting out of the Langford building and getting on a plane and going home or wherever you're going. Ambassador Sondland, you don't really deserve the title, so I'm just going to call you, Gordon, your Gordon problem. Gordon, you have probably done as much damage that you could do to yourself in multiple formats, legal, civil, criminal, potentially. I mean, I really think you did yourself a grave disservice by changing your testimony and not including any material facts into it. I think you've done a great disservice to your credibility by your refresher rate and recalling facts. I think that you came across as relatively ignorant, potentially senile. I think that you were a failed diplomat on all fronts. I am not disappointed as much as I am confused, confounded by what you displayed today. I am confused, confounded by your attorney as a legal representative seated there that allowed you to go forward with this process. And obviously, you are so ignorant about what other people have said under oath. And you're obviously so ignorant that you didn't even expect that this hearing would be carried out in the same manner that the other ones were, or did you even check and watch them? Sondland appears to me a distracted, deep-pocketed multimillionaire who has dalliances with politics, and he is gravely unaware of what he did to himself today. And the Democrats are gravely overestimating the political impacts of his presumptions. But needless to say, the Democrats have predicated none of this on facts alone up to this point. Therefore, I have no expectation that the Democrats will put any limits or put the brakes on, because we still haven't determined that there's any actual facts. And I believe that perhaps the fact that Sondland decided to go back because he's so unaware of the evolutionary terms of what the Democrats are charging, starting initially with quid pro quo, realizing that's not going to work, go to bribery, realizing that's not going to work, go to extortion. Being, so blissfully unaware, he reintroduces quid pro quo. So now the Democrats are forced to go back to the quid pro quo side of this whole thing. And now they'll go back to the Mulvaney comments, and then to Giuliani, and then to obstruction of Congress for not having everybody else testify. So by disputing public accounts by Pompeo and Pence and Zelensky, all of these people, Yermak in Ukraine, by disputing the accounts that they've given in a public sector, Sondland has now opened himself to be construed in comparison to all of these circumstances that these other individuals are involved in. I, for one, would not want to be in his particular chair, whether it's in front of Congress or in the first class of a plane going to wherever he's going right now. I assure you, you have not fled your circumstances, Gordon. I think you've, in fact, entrenched yourself, ensconced yourself inextractably into the middle of this thing till its bitter, fruitless end. And I think I have no pity for you. You have done no due diligence. You clearly didn't make yourself aware of the facts as they were testified by all the others. You clearly did not watch the other testimonies before Congress. You were clearly not aware of how this process even worked. It was a stunning display of ignorance and willful stupidity. The fact that you ever worked in United States diplomatic channels is an affront to anyone who's ever really served in that capacity. And again, it is more testimony to one thing and one thing only, that we make constant mistakes inside the Department of State, inside the Department of Justice, inside the White House, inside the National Security Council, inside the EIC. We have made time and time again drastic, costly human resources decisions. They are not at the sub-cabinet level to be placed at the feet of the president. Nonetheless, they are simply unforgivable omissions of responsibility, abdications of responsibility. I have no sympathy for it. I will call it as I see it, having worked in government for a very long time, including running the day-to-day operations of an agency of a $270 million budget annually and 5,000 employees. I am no stranger to what it's like to work with civil servants, with those who are against your mission. You must find a way to weed them out. You must find them a lateral move to another agency where they do not have the information access that they had previously under the administration prior to yours. And if it's an executive appointee, they must be removed. That's how we conduct political business in the United States of America. That is the transfer of power. That is your allowance, nay, responsibility as a new administration to jettison all executive appointed positions. Some can be reviewed and brought back on as needed or as warranted. There was all kinds of mistakes. They are festering. They are coming to fruition at times like this. They are manifesting themselves in the form of stupid people like Gordon Sondland. And now we must bear the bitter fruit. It all started with Jeff Sessions. It's continued under Rex Tillerson. There is not a lot Mike Pompeo can do to arrest this situation because the Department of State was already in full revolt against Tillerson. Pompeo was brought in to kind of calm down the angry waters, and in doing so was not allowed to make any substantive changes because, lo and behold, all the Cube Farm jockeys would scream and leak and say, we're undermining U.S. diplomacy worldwide. Again, today was more or less astounding to me to watch Sondland do what he did. The benefits to the Democrats will be a single news cycle. We'll see what the next testimony here reveals. I think we're going to get 50-50 out of Fiona Hill tomorrow. I think it is. I'm just confused where Sondland thinks he's flying off to. Sondland, you may be out of that congressional chair and you may be on a plane, but I assure you, Gordon, you are more in the middle of this than you ever were before, and you're not going anywhere anytime soon. And you will receive, I guarantee, within the next 48 to 72 hours, you will receive a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigations regarding your addendums to the testimony today and some of your questions that put in dispute facts as they were asserted by 6 or 7 other people who have given those facts either under oath or in the public sector. So I would not want to be you, not only because you are a laughable figure and quite hard to look at on a 55-inch flat screen for those long hours. You are not funny. There was no humor in anything about today. And if you've noticed, the only time any attempts at humor were introduced by the Democrats because they were mirthful, if you will, that you had decided to step into the minefield. And I must say, in a minefield, you are indeed, both in civil and criminal and political sense. You are indeed in a minefield. I would not want to be you. So again, we'll see what this next part of the testimony is. If anything comes out of this next testimony that is newsworthy, then Glenn and I will both jump on later tonight. I want to appreciate everybody who's reached out to me and given me the validation that some might want in my coverage of this impeachment process. A lot of people have reached out and contributed to my work, which is actually really nice when I'm spending 16 hours in 2 days doing this. Again, I make no contention that this is a real job. I make no contention that I am a journalist per se. I am merely bringing you my analysis of this. If that analysis is something that you happen to enjoy, then I am not too proud to be in receipt of both your encouragement in word form or in small contributions. It does give my wife a little more sense of comfort that I am spending my days currently doing this kind of work. So to all of you out there, I do appreciate that. And you might see me later tonight with Glenn. I don't know. I think this is really big news, having your president attacked like this. So yeah, I think it just takes a constant pressure of information and analysis to balance out what you're seeing on the TV, what you're hearing from a Ken Starr or a Chris Wallace on a network that you don't expect to be gaslit by, and you are. And I appreciate some of you do enemy intelligence on MSNBC and CNN, and I don't discourage that, but I do know that you will be discouraged by what you hear. Therefore, I will attempt to get in and not mitigate the facts, but mitigate the bad analysis. I think that's my role in all this, and occasionally when I can bring on other experts like Richard Barris, and we can talk about this thing in a policy and political sense, makes people feel a little bit more in the know on what's developing. And certainly something did develop today, but it's a narrative built on presumption. And as I tweeted today, and I think this will be, it's one of these underrated tweets, even if I do say so myself, but there's an old line from the Nixon era and carried over into Iran-Contra, which is, what did you know and when did you know it? I kind of paraphrased that today in summation of Sondland's testimony of what did you presume and when did you presume it? That is essentially how you boil it down with what happened today with Ambassador Sondland. What did you presume, Ambassador, and when did you presume it? Which, of course, in a world of material evidence is nothing. Again, effective questioning from our side, particularly give another hat tip to the members in particular that Devin Nunes counts on, that being not only Jim Jordan, but certain to a lesser extent Conway. And then I thought Turner did a fantastic job today. I thought Westrup was okay. Ratliff was okay. But again, Stefanik has stepped up, and Will Hurd quietly makes his points, although I object to him even being on that committee. They can't remove him because he was a former CIA case officer. He's not a big Trump fan, but he certainly sees that this is a charade. So I think Stefanik's stock is rising to the point where I don't really worry about George Conway giving a check to her opponent. So Representative Stefanik, my hat is off to you. I think you've done a fantastic job. Continue to do that work. And so I might see you later tonight, depending on this. If not, we'll probably do something tomorrow night in addition to our typical weekly schedule. Because after all, how many times does a leader of the free world get besieged with fake impeachment? Until then, hang in there, and I appreciate all the support.